In 2018, Pope Francis issued a document called Cor Orans. It was actually issued by one of the dicasteries of the Vatican, but it was under his authority. And it fundamentally changed the life for women religious in the church. And while it was lauded by some as clarifying the status of religious and their authority and autonomy, the key to what ended up happening is this concept of a forced membership into federations of similarly minded, meaning Benedictines with Benedictines and Carmelites with Carmelites, federations. These were sort of congresses. And the problem you ran into almost immediately was that these organizations were not similar at all. Benedictines, there are various different kinds of Benedictines, but the biggest dividing line between them was, as you might expect, traditionalist Benedictines or traditional friendly Benedictines and non-traditional Benedictines, more contemporary style. It's not just Benedictines. The same problem happened with Franciscans and Carmelites and any other group you pretty much care to name. Some have suggested that this document was actually intended to crush tradition, and in hindsight, that's exactly what happened with it. This document was used against organizations that were just too conservative. Not just traditionalist, but just conservative in general, dedicated more towards pre-conciliar understandings of their charism, pre-conciliar understandings of the liturgy and the discipline of the sacraments and everything else. What ended up happening is countless women religious orders were either suppressed or traditionalist elements within women religious orders were removed and sent off to the hinterlands. Or oftentimes these nuns would have to leave their orders and go found new independent ones. You've had several examples of nuns having to essentially ally themselves with the SSPX just so that they could be, for example, Carmelites that would be identifiable to the church as Carmelites before Vatican II to keep their traditional charisms going. It's a complicated document, but at its core, it changed one essential thing. It gave supervision of all of these organizations to federation presidents or male religious superiors or diocesan bishops, eliminating a canon law provision essentially that existed before the document. Superiors are given greater authority over some issues, but autonomy was lost in general over things. And there was controversies from this, and this will get to what we're talking about today. It required federation membership. It was criticized heavily for requiring monasteries to join federations. It was seen by some, typically traditionalist and very conservative groups, as undermining the autonomy of individual monasteries. Critics, including myself, argued that federations, while framed as structures of communion in Vatican II kind of language, they actually functioned as governing bodies. They centralized control and diluted unique charisms. Some nuns expressed fear that smaller or traditional monasteries would end up losing their distinct identities because they were forced into federations that did not align with their spiritual practices. Plain language. Traditional habited nuns who spend most of their time praying and working in their monasteries behind the scenes to make generate the revenue they need to keep their monasteries open as per canon law, being governed by more contemporary religious who wear pantsuits and who are out in the world making a mess of things. Imagine the nuns on the bus and their more traditional sisters all under the same governing structure. And usually, almost always, the more pantsuit type nuns being the ones in charge of enforcing the laws and norms over convents far, far away. That's what ends up happening in every single case. And what ended up happening as a result, it was the instrument used to help crush countless orders of women religious. That is a long introduction for a story here that you're going to see veiled in a lot of propaganda. And it comes to us from a blog called Open. It's a culture website. I was a little surprised to see them reporting on nuns, but this is true. This story checks out, except for the details they give you, because they paint you a picture of these habited nuns essentially being evil. By evil, we mean rigid. By evil, we mean not evil at all. Actually, like holding to the pre-conciliar faith. We're not going to go over the whole story here. The headline here is The Incredible Story of the Nuns Who Escaped from the Convent of Vittorio, Veneto, where excellent Prosecco was produced. And there they are holding their bottles of Prosecco. The story goes like this. In 2018, new rules came down, and there were young leadership. Typically, you always find this is to be the case, as young leadership comes to power in these convents where they want to start returning to their traditional norms, traditional, more rigid practices. Rigid, such an evil word in the post Vatican II Francis Church, but they want to have a more authentically Catholic experience. They want to actually be Carmelites in a way that their sisters in the Carmel would have recognized them centuries before, or Dominicans, or whatever it is. And as is always the case, accusations start flying. We saw this in Texas recently, where some absurd on its face accusations were leveled. Upon investigation, none of them turned out to be true. You may have heard the Arlington Carmelite nuns. Their Mother Superior was accused of violating her vows with a priest from another diocese. She apparently admitted to it while she was grilled under the influence of post-surgery pain medications, where she was not even fit to drive a car. In any secular court, that confession would never have stood up. But unfortunately, in the eyes of many Catholics, apparently that was just enough, including for the bishop of her diocese, who tried to force her out of her own convent. The sisters ended up resisting him and are now affiliated with the SSPX. Interestingly enough, the priest that she had admitted under the duress of these chemicals that were designed to help her deal with the pain she had from surgery, the priest was investigated by his bishop and found to have not done anything at all. And so the entire case against her falls apart. And I'm sure it's not a coincidence that the land that those nuns were sitting on is worth millions upon millions of dollars. This also happens to be a common thread whenever Cor Orans is enforced. And as you can see in this article, because money is at the heart of this one as well. You see, they manufacture Prosecco, highly prized wine. Typically, spirits and other adult beverages that are produced by religious orders around the world, whether it's beer or wine or anything else, tend to be some of the best. Among the connoisseurs of those beverages, those produced by religious orders are consistently rated among the highest. Go look at Trappist beer if you don't believe me. And in this story, you will find a couple of other things. Even this article will tell you that even Pope Francis investigated the accusations of authoritarianism, utter rigidity, and physical harm being done by the Mother Superior to the nuns who didn't want to go along with the more rigid prayer and spiritual life as expected by the order. He investigated it and found nothing amiss, but they tried to crush them anyway. Fascinating. There were a lot of these nuns ended up leaving this order because it was as this article calls, a generational clash. Here are the final details. Quote, the nuns who tried to escape are trying to contain the convent's rebellion. Attempting mediation, explains Vassetti in Repubblica, an Italian news outlet, is Mario Giuseppe Lepore, general abbot of the Cistercian order. They're trying to prevent the escaped nuns from retaining, as request, dispensation from their vows and permission to break the cloister forever. The internal conflict the newspaper emphasizes is generational. The elderly nuns, the young expelled abbess confided, don't forgive us for the photos inside the monastery, the weekly WhatsApp messages to family members, a comprehensive interpretation of individual outings, the desire to finance ourselves with the products of our work. That is, those creams, herbal teas, aloes, extracts, embroidery, oil, but above all, wine, sponsored and produced by the structure. The elderly, silent because of the sudden spiritual exercises, want a limit to the ora et labora. End quote. For traditional monasteries, ora et labora, the law of prayer and the law of working, they all follow essentially the rule of Benedict, typically change to meet their needs. But it all comes down to they pray and they work and they work and they pray, and that's about all they do. It's a hard life. It's a spiritually rewarding life for those who stick to it. And the nuns who'd had it a different way apparently did not like this whatsoever, especially when the younger nuns were starting to have, the ones in charge, were starting to use modern technology and other things to essentially enforce the charisms, to enforce the rules of the order, the rules of their life. They didn't like it much. Now, I can see some pushback on this. Maybe the accusations were true. There are people who still believe what happened in Arlington was as what the bishop said, when it turns out on its face was false. There are some, in this case, who will say, well, maybe the younger nuns should have founded their own order. Here's the thing about that. It's nearly impossible now to found a tradition-friendly religious order, even if you're not dedicated to the traditional liturgy. No indication here of this story of the traditional mass being involved at all. The founding of new religious orders gets harder and harder the more conservative they are. It's as simple as that. And this is a story or a problem for the new pope, whomever he will be, to address when he comes in. Will the new Holy Father enforce Cor Orans as is? Will he ignore the problem? Or will he revisit this and try to strengthen religious life by undoing Cor Orans and allowing traditionally minded, whatever they are, either just conservative or traditionalist, religious orders to govern themselves away from those federations so that they are not under the oversight of extremely liberal organizations? This is where a lot of the problem comes in. These older nuns can appeal to their federation, which is typically run by people who are going to be more like-minded to them, the post-conciliar mindset. What you see in stories like this is the clash of the mindset between women religious, and the more traditional mindset and the contemporaries. And you see this problem with the male religious too, but Cor Orans is typically not for them. And as a consequence, in the news, you see mostly it's women religious orders being crushed. And for some reason, that just rubs me the wrong way. I don't know about you, but for some reason, nuns being targeted by this just makes me even more angry than monks are, even though I have nothing but love and respect and admiration for monks, especially the more prayerful their orders tend to be. Because at the end of the day, anybody who dares to go after prayerful nuns who are the prayer warriors of the church, spend their days praying for the rest of us, is no friend of mine. I'm curious what you think about this, though. Are you that surprised? Do you think maybe the accusations I didn't go over them, but the elderly nuns accused them of authoritarian tendencies, trying to basically spy on everybody and using physical violence to enforce the rules? Do you think there might be something to that? We've seen these accusations time and time and time and time again over the last 12 years, always going one way, almost always being found to be not the case, or grotesque exaggerations of things going on. And one wonders if there's something in those federations where the members of those religious orders who don't like that suddenly those orders they've been part of their whole lives suddenly becoming more conservative, they're being told by somebody in those federations that this is how you can deal with the problem. One wonders. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. So like and subscribe if you haven't. Certainly helps. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.